Very good afternoon, all of you. Thank you very much for joining us here. And I have great pleasure to introduce our Vice Dean of Jindal Global Law School, Professor Vesselin Popovski, to you. My name is Anand Prakash Mishra. I'm the Director of Law Admissions at OP Jindal Global University. And I'm delighted to introduce you to someone who is having a very distinguished academic as well as professional experience, and also who has the honor of being one of the senior most professors and vice dean of our law school for last many years. But before that, Dr. Vesselin Popovski, who is a PhD from King's College London, he started his journey, his academic journey, if I see, at a very prestigious international relations institute and college in Moscow, in Russia, where he did his MA as well as a BA in international relations, and that is Moscow State Institute of International Relations. So it's presumably the most prestigious international relations school in Russia. And then he moved to international law. He came to London School of Economics for a master's, where he did an MSc, and then he also did a postgraduate diploma in European law from King's College London, and finally he earned his PhD from the prestigious King's College London, which is arguably one of the best law schools and universities in the world. And we have the honor to have him as a colleague, as a senior in the university last many years, as an international law professor, and also as the director of Center for United Nations Studies. He actually started this center, and his long experience of serving more than a decade or so in the United Nations University in Tokyo, it's something which helped the university and the law school at Jindal to set up the Center for United Nations Studies. So I think he's the most, also he has been a Bulgarian diplomat, someone who handled foreign services. So I wish him to introduce you to the theme, law and governance of COVID-19, and also a bit of introduction to international law and his own journey. So over to you, Professor, and thank you very much for this session. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for the excellent introduction. And the topic I would like to address today is something which probably all of you very much experience in your own life, in your own family, wherever you are in India. So, and it is the time when we start to reconsider and revise all of our knowledge on law and governance, being that domestic or international. Let me say first that there is probably no better time to enroll in a degree and study in a higher education than this one. The challenge of COVID-19 makes everybody, lawyers, doctors, politicians, professors, everybody reconsider our efficiency, our imagination, how do we deliver services and knowledge and research and publications and so on. So for you as a young students, it will be probably the best time to start a degree and to gain from the vast expertise and history already. Jindal Global Law School has already 10 years of history and the highest reputation in India and South Asia, #1 law school in India and South Asia, and top 150 law schools in the world. And this is only for 10 years. So there is no surprise that Jindal Global Law School is probably the best place for you to consider to enroll in your future studies. Not least because the law school itself reacted immensely productively. We moved our teaching online. We didn't lose a minute to satisfy the students' expectations in terms of delivery of the courses, the teaching, the research. So effectively, we used to do this anyway. We have a lot of online studies and distance learning and international collaboration and exchanges. So when the COVID-19 hit the world, not only India and Jindal University, but everybody else, we, I must say, were very much prepared for that. So it's really amazing time, as I said, to become a student. Let me say in a few words, how do I see the changes in the world because of COVID-19? As I mentioned already, the first one, it will be the higher demand for higher education. Most students will enroll, and we see this already happening in other schools, in Jindal Global Universities. There is a high demand for new skills, for innovation, for delivering of public services and so on. Another interesting element of the COVID-19 is that most of the work will be now automated. Even courts can start delivering their judgments and deliberations and sentences online. The notaries, visa services, all different kind of legal services, registrations. Something, again, it's not that it started with COVID-19, but COVID-19 will accelerate the delivery of legal services very much online with the efficiency which the modern technology demands. So there will be no need to have a long queue and bureaucracy and paperwork as soon as the services, the future of the law profession will very much utilize the latest technology as we do even today. Usually I would deliver this lecture in person, traveling to you from Delhi and delivering this myself physically. But because of the situation, we have to do it online, which is perfectly well. It actually saves our time, your time to go somewhere, and my time to go to your city. So that's kind of the first reaction of the, if you want, the legal profession will react pretty quickly to the challenge of COVID-19. What we also interesting experience is the responsibility of governments and the responsibility of citizens. Again, COVID-19 made us understand how important it is to have the right information in the right time, the statistics, the models, the suggestions given by not only the medical profession, but also the public services and public policy governments. How important it is to have the trust between government and citizens. And for that matter, many countries did not impose lockdowns. They made it very clear to the citizens what are the dangers and let companies and citizens decide how to exercise social distance, how to protect each other, how to work from home, and so on. So we have good examples, and I must say this is, for example, Germany, New Zealand, South Korea, Austria. Several countries did not limit, in other words, at all, their citizens in exercising their daily duties, but simply citizens as such exercise this caution, wearing masks and protecting each other, social distancing, moving to work from home, and so on. So very important in those days is to have responsible government and responsible citizens. Unfortunately, not all governments actually acted pretty swiftly, and we see several European countries, but mostly United States, suffering tremendously because, I must say, of the inconsistency, different messages from different states, unpreparedness generally to address the disaster, the medical and epidemiological disaster. Somebody wrote very well that Thomas Payo made this very interesting suggestion that the way to deal with this in terms of governance and law is what he called hammer and dance. Hammer, a strong initial response to control the virus, to trace and check all the infected. And then once we have a reduction in cases, then it becomes a dance, which means a zigzag between relieving those restrictions and monitoring the cases, again, tracing contacts and so on. So with the initial hammer on the virus, then the second stage, the dance, become much easier, as Thomas Payo argued. One mistake some governments made was that the lockdowns have to be very long. They don't. If you have a proper system to reduce the infections and to send the right messages to the responsible citizenry, it doesn't need to be long. 3-4 weeks in some countries would be enough to move from the first stage, which is the hammer, the lockdown stage, into the relief stage afterwards. And several governments already moved that way. Singapore, South Korea, Austria, and soon probably other countries. Although they might have a second rise in the cases, if the preparedness is there. In other words, if we have all the necessary medical equipment, protection equipment, hospital beds, ventilators, masks, and so on, there should not be a problem to reduce the reproduction of the disease much more. Now, let me turn to something else which is quite interesting, and there is a debate in the legal community about this, about the emergency situations and the rights of the citizens. This has been very often the debate in the law schools, and it's not the first time. For example, after 9/11, the biggest terrorist attack on American soil in September 2001, a similar debate about to what extent the freedom of movement, the checks at the airports, need to be strengthened as to reduce the possibility of terrorist or other criminal act. And many citizens actually accepted that some restrictions, some delays even in security checks are the so-called the price to pay so that we are secure. So in a sense, the security and the freedoms need to go hand in hand. We realize as reasonable citizens that some restrictions are necessary for our security, in this case health security, in previous cases terrorist, anti-terrorist security, and so on. But in any case, the acceptance of citizens that some restrictions are temporarily necessary is the way to bridge this dilemma otherwise between citizens' rights and restrictions. Obviously, nobody likes restrictions. Everybody wants to go back to the street and to meet their friends and to enjoy the socialization. But in time of crisis, as we experience now, that is not possible. Another dilemma, which we discuss in various webinars, and I'm sure maybe you are reading about this elsewhere in debates about the economy and the public health. Certainly the economy will suffer because of the lockdown, no surprise there. So the calculation of between how much the economy needs to suffer for the public health to be restored is an important one. Again, the best model here would be to say that the two should not be in contradiction. In a sense, we need the public health and the economy to move forward in one way or another. Healthy people contribute to the economy. So in a sense, I'm very much against those who will say better to sacrifice some elderly people, but for the young people to go to work and make money. This is definitely not the approach. If you know, in the moral philosophy, there are several interesting movements, and one of them is the so-called utilitarian movement, which is John Stuart Mill and others will say that the best model is to have the happiness of as many citizens as possible, but that model actually excludes some who might not benefit. And against that is John Rawls' ideas of justice, which basically emphasize the importance of equality of all. So no matter whether people are old or young, they all have the same rights, the same freedoms. So they cannot be in any way sacrificing one group against another. So that's definitely something to avoid. But again, unfortunately, certain minorities in certain countries have been discriminated. The numbers show, for example, the Black community in New York City, for example, was heavily affected. 70% of the cases in New York City were of the Black community. And the debate went into, were those people really vulnerable before anyway, in terms of access to medical service, poverty, underdevelopment, lack of enough education. So the COVID-19 effectively re-escalated some of the tensions between communities in certain places. Let me give you another example. The problem with refugees and displaced people, which is quite serious in countries in the Middle East, in Turkey, Jordan, Eastern Europe, even all of Europe. Again, many applications for refugee status have to be postponed, and accordingly people felt isolated and discriminated. Or to take something closer to India, the example of poor people who would have no wages apart from very little jobs, daily jobs to sustain their life, would be unfortunately more severely affected by COVID-19. And in those situations, if we take the example of India, but not only India, the example of Africa, Latin America, Brazil, many countries will certainly experience more difficulties than others, mostly in terms of compensating the victims of COVID-19, the survivors of COVID-19, because of job loss, because of other hardship, and accordingly governments need to take action to reduce that suffering with unemployment packages, requalification, and re-employment of people who may have lost their jobs. Interestingly, and that's another global debate about the right-wing and the left-wing political antagonism, if you will. In time of crisis like this one, the left-wing, the center left-wing narrative becomes stronger. And there is, again, no surprise, because usually market economy works pretty well and it balances the supply and demand. It kind of equals the prices of the competition and so on. But in time of crisis, the government role in economy becomes crucial. One change which might happen, and again, I'm not talking about India, I'm talking globally, mostly in the European context where I come from. The debate is about left-wing party getting strong electoral support after COVID-19. Again, nothing surprising, having in mind that the role of the governments in such crisis situation definitely increases. The market itself cannot supply the extra unemployment packages. It cannot do much about the emergency medical needs, and somebody need to plan the recovery and also the crisis response itself in terms of hospital beds and so on. So the planning economies may act much faster, and somehow this explains why some Asian countries did better than the European countries. The mobilization in South Korea, in Taiwan, in Singapore, in China produced quite good results, as we see, whereas some democracies, United Kingdom, but also other European countries, Spain, Italy, Netherlands, Switzerland, were very severely affected by the coronavirus. Some started to talk about that democracies are failing, but authoritarian regimes are winning, which I disagree. I don't think that's a correct assumption, because in terms of values and principles and norms, democracies will always sustain the competition. They will be the one that long-term will definitely recover much faster. But in time of emergency, unfortunately, some democracies hesitate and delay responses, and people may suffer more. But there are very good examples. Again, if you look at the best examples, these are democracies. New Zealand, zero, eradication of coronavirus. Germany, Austria, South Korea, another democracy that did very, very well. So it's not that the democracies are less ready to fight COVID-19. It's more kind of a temporary problem, which I hope can be fixed in a longer term. And then let me also say a little bit, because my time is probably advancing quickly, about what the future of education, of legal education including, may look like. Certainly, universities reacted quickly. We moved to teach online. We deliver all the courses as planned. Students are at home, but they study. They found, in fact, extra opportunity to utilize from their own home through the various electronic search engines, the literature they need. So in a sense, there will be, I would say, absolutely no problem to teach online and to finish our semester. So our current students will not be affected, with two little remarks. One is the lack of the physical library, so to speak, the books. So in a more classical sense, when I was a student, I would love to spend hours in a physical library with the books and to sit and to read in a calm atmosphere. So that will be missing for these 2 or 3 months. And the second is the socialization between the students. But the second one, I think, can be also done through the normal social media outlets. So students should not feel too much the physical distance, they can actually exercise very much socialization with all the same Teams, Zoom, and other applications that we are using currently. Therefore, again, my strong welcome for all of you to apply and to join the Jindal Global University. There will be absolutely no problem, both in terms of your health. We have a medical center on campus, which operates 24/7 at any time. Anybody can go, students, staff, faculty, and it's very well equipped to deal with the situation. We are also very hopefully planning to have the vaccine once the medical science produce those, hopefully by early 2021. So there will be a possibility to get a vaccine on campus and not to worry anymore about COVID-19. Certainly, some social distancing may continue to be necessary. Some meetings may need to be done online, which again simply will make it less frequent, the physical contact. But as I said, there is absolutely no problem to deliver all the materials that we have in the circumstances that we are now. Something more, I would like to end in a kind of a positive note. I see usually crises as opportunities. And in the same way as the biggest crisis of the 20th century, the Second World War, produced the United Nations. And I wrote recently about this, that 75 years after the establishment of the United Nations, it's time to reimagine the international institutions, the WHO and the UNDP and all other parts of the United Nations that are extremely helpful for the equality and the education of everyone. So there was already a lot of innovation and acceleration, and very soon, I suppose in the next couple of years, we will have a very much a different world where cooperation between states, but also cooperation within communities and between people will become a very important feature. And again, let me say, most welcome to Jindal Global University. We will be happy to see you and to educate you and to meet all your needs. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take now questions.
So we have some really good questions, actually great questions from some of the audience, and I would like to put that one by one. Not exactly, I mean, all questions relate to international law, but it's like a mix. And yes. The first question which I would like to put you, it's a very interesting question.
Yes.
That is about your own background. A student has asked, if you were still a diplomat serving your country, what steps would you have taken as a Bulgarian diplomat to safeguard your citizens in China if you are working in China?
Okay, thank you. I appreciate actually very much this question. I used to be a diplomat. I worked for 9 years, including in London and New York for a short time. And as you know, the role of the diplomat is to, there are several roles, but one of them is to develop international relations, and very often bilateral relations with different states. Kind of what I found a bit disturbing is the kind of anti-Chinese feelings among many and even serious people and scholars. I had a debate recently about whether China should be held liable for coronavirus. And the answer to that, again, I'm not talking very diplomatically. Let me tell you my position as a professor, and then I'll tell you also my position as a diplomat. as an observer rather than as a professor, I'm not a Chinese expert, but what I find interesting is that no government did very well. A lot of government can actually find a lot of mistakes they made in terms of informing populations, in terms of data and models and so on. And Chinese did not be different in a way. They were late in acknowledging the problem, because it's understandable, because in China it happened for the first time. This is where the most serious hit came before many other countries. So I'm not blaming China for being late. What probably I'm blaming China only is that some of the first signals came from doctors, and in a kind of authoritarian system very often, and I lived in one. Bulgaria was a communist country when I was a student. Often we will see the governments being secretive. They will not tell the population. They will try to improve the image of the disaster first, and then to report it massively to everybody else. So the delay due to exactly that authoritarian rule in China apparently produce victimhood, and some doctors who were silenced have definitely their human rights were violated. But after that, in January and February, we will see a very different story, and China reacted quite successfully, including in informing other countries about that they opened the medical research knowledge they have. WHO, the biggest an important health organization in the world, visited Wuhan in China, and accordingly, they made a report, and that helped many other countries. Now, that's my, if I'm an observer independently. Obviously, if I'm a diplomat in China, I will take care of the Bulgarian people who live in China, and that's what many of the embassies have as their priority, somehow to make everything possible if they want to be evacuated back to Bulgaria, or if they want to go to anywhere they want to go. So help to Bulgarian citizens in a country which experience extreme hardship will be task number one for every embassy, not only the Bulgarian, but any other embassy will take care of the citizen being there. And also another task of the diplomats is to keep constant communications with the foreign ministry of that country, and to receive, exchange information, to help as much as possible with every delivery of any humanitarian assistance if necessary, and so on. So the embassies do play crucial role, and they should stay. So that's very important. Embassies should not shut down. They need to be there at least as communication point between the countries. International cooperation is crucial to face the pandemics and many other disasters like that. So the embassies should be open. Of course, they need to do also the social distancing, working from home, and every other precautionary measures, but generally embassies never close.
So there are two questions, one by Ishan Pandey, and Ishan has asked a question. It's more bent toward constitutional law about the federal and unitary powers of state. And Dipti Sharma has asked a similar question. I would like to combine the two for you. So Ishan's question is the exercising of its unitary power by the state, the way central government is exercising its powers, justified in the light of the current pandemic, or should the state governments be given more autonomy? Now, the key question is, how can we ensure that the governments which are bent on exercising as much power as they possibly can during the pandemic remain democratic in a post-COVID world? How can we stop them from becoming authoritarian, specifically in the third world nations? I'm really happy. I don't know whether they are law students or they're still to join law school, but good question. Yeah,
absolutely. A marvelous question. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate such erudite, elevated question. So let me say that many countries impose emergency situations. There is no doubt about that. In fact, what's interesting, and I study Israel, where the emergency has never been actually lifted. Israel, the state of Israel, existed in an emergency since 1948, since the first Arab-Israel war. And because of many other wars between the Arabs and Israel, that emergency was still in place until today, until the time when this next emergency had to be imposed on the previous emergency. So it's quite a paradoxical situation. So yes, what does emergency mean? In different constitutions, different things, but to kind of generalize that, we can say that effectively the government took over emergency powers and make quick decisions, exactly because there is no time to wait until the whole parliamentary democratic process may allow. So acting in emergency means that some of the powers of the central government will be definitely much higher than in a normal times. And the question itself is a little bit rhetorical when you ask how to ensure that this doesn't last long. When is the end point of the emergency? What I find mostly, and even in a very dramatic situations like Hungary, in Hungary, the parliament approved the emergency power, and the government was very criticized for asking for indefinite emergency powers. So that definitely is something to be cautioned about, not only to caution, but actually to resist having indefinite emergency power. The emergency should end when the pandemic ends, as soon as, and it will depend mostly on the coronavirus itself. The virus will tell us when it is dead, and when it is dead, there is no longer an emergency situation. We don't need to have the extreme powers to the government, but let's be also aware that governments enjoy power. They love to have extra powers. They love to control and command longer than necessary. And this is the time when the civil society and the parliamentarian system itself needs to impose limits to the extraordinary powers that governments may possess for certain time. Media, by the way, and academia and the civil society play also an important role here. And we hope that the danger of extending emergencies power will not be very problematic. Like my colleague from Israel said, we need to go back to the previous emergency. After the pandemics, we will go to the normal emergency, which is caused by the history of Israel, as you say, had a lot of security dilemmas and problems. So that's why the state of Israel always existed in a state of emergency. But this one is different. Obviously, I also studied what the constitutions of several countries say about emergencies, but this one needs to be considered as public health emergency. Do not introduce other war language. A lot of people talk about we are fighting a war. We are not fighting a war. We are fighting a pandemic, which is a very different thing. We don't send soldiers and armies and weapons against an enemy here. So the use of language of we are fighting invisible enemy, the war language, and some countries also introduce anti-terrorist emergencies, which are also very different from what we experience now. So the language, because the constitution very often were drafted having in mind war and terrorism, not about pandemics. But this emergency needs to be situated, contextualized in the public health pandemic language. Thank you. Great question.
So the next question is very practical question in today's situation. Student asks, Sir, being a student, I fear about the job opportunities in the post-COVID world. Do you think COVID-19 will affect the availability of jobs? So,
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you for a good question. And actually, not only students, but everybody should worry, because in fact, the COVID-19 affect those who are currently employed mostly, not those who will be employed after 4 or 5 years. Let me give you this answer. We shouldn't worry about COVID-19 so much, rather than the general change in the profession itself, and not only the legal profession, but any other professions. The future of jobs will be very different from the current job situation. There will be more automatic deliveries. Some jobs will disappear necessarily. A job of a driver, or a chef in a restaurant, waiter, or receptionist in the hotel will disappear. Jobs that can be automated, or to put it simply, done by robots, are no longer necessary jobs. And not only those jobs, which are very much kind of physical and manual, but let's see even a job of interpreter. When I was a young student, many of my colleagues wanted to study languages to become interpreters and translators, and many did. And at that time, it was kind of a big opportunity for people to study languages and to become translators. And they did at the time, but no longer. Today, with the Google Translator, everybody has a translator or interpreter in your mobile phone. You don't need a physical translator anymore. The job of a typewriter disappears. A lot of jobs will disappear. And the way to think about this is not to worry. Okay, let me say my job will disappear. In a sense, I'm teaching students, but a robot can come and teach students better than me, and that's absolutely normal. A robot will know all the literature, millions of books and articles and experiences in one chip, which no human being can have the same ability of memory of what a robot can do. But my approach to that future is not to worry that a robot will come and take my job. I will create a robot to take my job. Because if a robot can come and teach students, then I can have extra time to do research, to publish more books, or to create the next generation of robots to write the books and to do the research. So our thinking should be very much future-oriented, not to worry about the current and the past, but to think and questions like, what do we want to achieve? What is my dream? What project shall I take? What discovery I need to make? How to live in the future, which is very different from today, should be our guidance. So don't worry about jobs. Create your future jobs using your imagination, your dreams, your inspirations. And definitely Jindal University will help you a lot. We have very innovative, very inspirational.
Also, Dean, I would like to add the students from the law school. The moment you graduate as a lawyer and as a professional. And law is something beyond jobs. Jobs are a part of law, but legal profession is hardly, I will say, 25% or 50% to be jobs. The larger part of the profession is into practice and litigation and judiciary. And in a country like India, where over 3.2 crore cases are pending, and where we have a large system of high courts and district courts and the Supreme Court, I mean, it's a large court system where there is a serious dearth of good lawyers at every level. I mean, even at the district level, in one court, you won't find more than, say, a dozen good lawyers. And the kind of pendency we are having in courtrooms, almost every district needs good lawyers who are trained in law and who are able to handle cases in a professional manner. So legal profession, I feel, will remain, it should remain recession proof due to the COVID situation or similar things. There could be maybe job losses in the law firms if there is automation happening, but that also in the long run will be beaten by the kind of globalized world we are increasingly becoming. So I don't think at this stage a student should worry about jobs. If you study law well, I mean, you never know whether you are going to like become an entrepreneur. Some of the largest corporations of the world are set up by lawyers, as well as some of the largest NGOs, Transparency International, the world's largest sports management company, IMG. They're all qualified lawyers who got into business and then set up large corporations. So for a lawyer, the profession is so diverse, and the skill set which a student receives after completing 5 years or 3 years of law degree, that whatever be the situation, the skills you have learned in the law school, it's going to keep you floating and growing. So one last question I should say, we have some 12 minutes time, and it's a very interesting question. It has come to I mean, it's a bit different question also, because it's more philosophical, and for you personally, that what do you think as a law professor you prescribe more for the world, for a better world, communism, capitalism, or democracy?
Okay, thank you. Definitely democracy, because long term it wins all the battles. Let's put it this way. There was successful authoritarian regime but for a short time, and they why they are successful? Because they mobilize and torture the population to work faster, and that's why if you look at Stalin in the Soviet Union and again Mao Zedong in communist China, again you have a period of economic growth, but it was very much at the expense of the human suffering and the human rights and the human liberties. So the long-term success is always in democracy. So if you want a good comparison, China and India, the biggest countries in the world, and a lot of future of the world will be in Asia. There is absolutely no doubt about this. With the decline of the United States and the European Union also having difficulties, a lot of power, economic power, but also political power and even military power is shifting to Asia, to China, India, Indonesia, and other countries. And they become the half of the world in terms of population already. And I'll say if you compare China and India, even as I said, Chinese may look very well mobilized and prepared for the future, I think longer term it will create problems because of the lack of democracy, because of the lack of freedoms of expression, because of the lack of criticism, which normally is very important and needed for countries to thrive ahead. Therefore, yes, I'm absolutely certain that India will overcome China. Maybe not immediately, maybe not in the next 2-3 years, but in a longer term, if you take 10, 15 years, India will be much stronger than China. Let me say something also about the jobs, which Anand, just to use the last minutes for that. A good way of thinking about future jobs is to say that the laws will never disappear. And that is kind of your positive thinking about this, because but the jobs will change. Obviously, a lot of them will be much more automated. The legal profession will change. A lot of the delivery will be done online through telephones rather than through physical meetings. A lot of paper will disappear. Contracts will be done again very much quickly online. Courts will operate online, and many countries already have courts not physically sitting but operating online. And that's the beauty of the legal studies and the legal educations, that the law never disappears, but you will study in the next 5 or 3 years in best environment to face the future of the legal profession, because Jindal Global University can provide and deliver your best qualification and best skills, how to be a lawyer or a legal advisor to a government or anybody. As Hanan mentioned, there are jobs everywhere. Our students don't only graduate and go to law firms, they take jobs in international institutions and everywhere else, and they thrive there, they flourish because of the excellent education which provide the Jindal Global Law School.
So another question before
Yes.
we have some time left. So Surbhi Kesri, Surbhi has asked a question. What about fake news in these difficult times? Should they be penalized in line with existing laws, or do new regulations more apt to the situation need to be instituted? What I understand Surbhi means, for pandemic-like situation, do we need a special laws to handle even issues like fake news?
Thank you. And actually, this question already exemplifies the future of law. We don't need to worry that we will have no job, because every year, every crisis we face demand new regulation, demand new statute, and demand new thinking and innovation to cover the legal gaps. And not only what you just mentioned, the data privacy, the protection, the cyber security, the artificial intelligence, a lot of things are in a movement to be regulated. And one of them will be definitely the fake news and how to punish the fake news. Again, fake news is not something new. It existed centuries ago. A lot of authoritarian, back to the question about the different regimes. Authoritarian regimes are those who spread the biggest fake news. Hitler and Stalin spread the biggest fake news. Hitler was talking, the Germans are the best people in the world. The rest of the world doesn't matter. Ethnically, Germans should occupy the rest. Or Stalin will say, communist system is the best in the world. Everybody else doesn't matter. So these are fake news. And again, the way to fight the fake news, unfortunately, is not so much the law and the punishment, rather than the right information and the truth. So the science, I would say, the science and the correct information, and the delivery of that information, the dissemination of correct information, is the way to somehow stigmatize the fake news and to make it people not to believe in it. And I have a project now actually studying why so many conspiracies flourished. People take absolutely unbelievable stories and believe in them. And I found several reasons for that. And one of those is that somehow the official story is usually very boring. People would like to have a scandal. They will, if they are told something extremely improbable, they may believe that actually this is the lack of trust in government also create fake news. People believe in stories like Americans didn't land on the moon, or Lady Diana was killed by the royal family, and all of that unbelievable fantasy may get a portion of people believing in those. And they believe in those exactly because nobody accepts that Lady Diana, a celebrity, can die in a car accident, which is something very trivial, very boring, very banal. They want to hear something spicy. And for that matter, fake news and conspiracies can flourish for some time. And you are right, in time of crisis, it's extremely important to find the correct information and to use mostly the sources of medical science. So for example, I read Nature and Science, the two journals that will provide verified, check 10 times information. And if you get that information about coronavirus, about the models of spreads and epidemiology, you will be much more informed than even the governments. So what is my advice to many people who worry and who ask me when this is going to end, what shall I do, is just read. Use exactly the beauty of being at home with your computer. Read reliable information and don't read everything else which exists there, because first of all, you waste your own time, you get angry, and that's not what people should do. Find the, and
yeah. Our time is going to be up, but Tanvi has asked an interesting question about the future of United Nations and WHO itself. When she says the current news is that United States has altered the funding of WHO, and UN is also questioned. Is there a possibility of degradation in the authority of these organizations?
I think so. This is the time, and I wrote, by the way, a reform proposal for the Secretary General Guterres. Anybody who is interested can find me, and I will send you what I have written, how I see the future of the United. It's a long paper, but to say briefly, this is the time when United Nations need really to reform. There is no other way. The organization has experienced many problems, mostly in the security area, mostly with addressing the situations such as Syria, Congo, Yemen. Many people die because the United Nations was inefficient, mostly the Security Council of the United Nations, because of the veto, and not only of Russia and China, but also of the United States. So the reform of the security architecture is extremely needed, and that is, again, a hope, a belief. In the current circumstances, with such leadership in the United States, Britain, and elsewhere, I don't think it will be a very much quick process, but maybe with a different president in the White House next year, we might have some changes in the United Nations. A lot of people criticize WHO, but let me say that WHO is a very small organization with a limited budget, and they did what states allowed them to do, what is in their mandate. So I see absolutely, again, it's another conspiracy, if you want, that China and WHO cheated the world and let the virus spread. Absolutely not true. WHO acted immediately. The moment they received information on December 31st, they didn't stop for the New Year break. They work overnights, 24 hours to correspond with all possible agencies to coordinate and to issue a quick response by January 5th. So the WHO is limited, and what needs to happen is actually to be empowered as an organization. What I suggested in my paper was to create a health security council. So instead of having a security council, and let that security council deal with Syria, Yemen, and Congo, but have health security council, which also has the big member states, including India, including Japan, Brazil, other countries which are not part of the security council now, can be very important players in a future architecture, which include, and by the way, not only health security council, I suggest climate security council. And when the health, the pandemics, and the climate change are taken in a different format, without veto, by many players, including big and mid countries like India and Japan and others, Brazil and South Africa, there will be much more ideas, much more commitment, more budget, and more resources and capacity to solve those problems. So it's very important to do the reform of the United Nations. It's no better time. I wrote that COVID-19 is too terrible to miss. So we shouldn't miss the moment of the COVID-19 to reform the United Nations and WHO.
And what a pleasant thing that our young minds, extremely young people who have yet not joined universities, they are thinking and deliberating and asking such questions. So with this, particular webinar comes to an end, and thank you very much, Dean Popovski, and all the students who attended this session. I hope all of you are studying well preparing well for your entrance exam. Even the entrance exams are facing difficulties. LSAT India, through which we admit students, has already changed its date once. And now the 7th June, the new date. We don't know whether we will be able to administer the exam. So it's a lot of uncertain times. But at the same time, there is a strong faith that we will win the situation. We will successfully conduct the exam. We will successfully admit our class of 2020. And also, who knows, some of you will get an opportunity to be taught by Professor Vesselin Popovski in the classroom and being a part of the law school at Jindal. So thank you very much and all the very best. Thank you, Professor.
Good luck, everybody, and welcome to Jindal Global University. Thank you.